The violent crack of the rifle shot split the calm Wyoming morning air as Damara Whitman's small hope chest slipped from her trembling fingers, hitting the dusty ground of the Ranchyard. She didn't flinch at the sound, not after everything she'd endured to get here, but her eyes darted to the source. A tall figure silhouetted against the harsh summer sun of 1887, rifle barrel still smoking. "That's far enough, madam," the man called out, his voice rough as gravel. "Next one won't be aimed at the dirt." Damara straightened her spine, the fabric of her travel-worn dress pulling tight across her shoulders. 26 years of life had taught her that showing fear only invited more trouble. She'd come too far, nearly 1,000 miles from St. Louis to be turned away now. "I'm looking for Mr. Randall Nicholson," she called back, shielding her eyes. "I was told this is his ranch." The figure lowered his rifle slightly but didn't approach. "Might be. Who's asking?" "My name is Damara Whitman. I—" Her voice caught as she glanced down at the small chest at her feet. "I have something that belongs to him." The man said nothing for a long moment, then slung his rifle over his shoulder and began walking toward her. As he drew closer, Damara could see his features more clearly, weathered skin darkened by the sun, a strong jaw shadowed by several days' stubble, and eyes the color of a winter sky. He wasn't as old as she had initially feared, perhaps 30 or so, but something in those pale eyes spoke of hardships beyond his years. He stopped a few paces from her, gaze flicking from her face to the chest at her feet. "I'm Randall Nicholson," he said flatly. "And I don't recall leaving anything with a lady I've never met." Damara knelt to gather her chest, the brass latches warm beneath her fingertips. "You knew my brother Samuel Whitman. You served with him." The change was immediate. Randall's face hardened and his hand tightened on the rifle strap. "Sam's dead," he said, the words clipped and final. "Yes," Damara replied softly. 2 months ago, consumption took him." Something flashed across Randall's face, pain, perhaps, or anger, before it disappeared behind a mask of indifference. "Sorry to hear it," he said. "Still doesn't explain why you're here." Damara drew a deep breath. "Before he died, Sam made me promise to bring this to you." She gestured to the chest. He said you'd understand what it meant." Randall's jaw worked as he stared at the chest. For a moment, Damara thought he might order her off his property, but then he jerked his head toward the house. "Come on, then. Sun's getting high, and you look like you could use some water." The ranch house was modest but solid, built from rough-hewn logs with a covered porch spanning the front. As Damara followed Randall up the steps, she noted the emptiness of the place. No rocking chairs or benches, no potted plants or decorative touches. Just bare wood and utility. Inside, the house was similarly Spartan. A table with 4 chairs dominated the main room, with a stone fireplace along one wall and a few cupboards and shelves against another. Everything was clean but devoid of comfort or personality. "Sit," Randall instructed, gesturing to the table before disappearing through a doorway. He returned moments later with a tin cup of water, which he placed before her with surprising gentleness. Damara drank gratefully, suddenly aware of how thirsty she was after the long journey from town. When she set the cup down, she found Randall watching her with guarded curiosity. "How did you get here?" he asked. "Train to Cheyenne, then the stage to Medicine Bow. A local freighter was kind enough to bring me the rest of the way. Long journey for a delivery." "A promise is a promise, Mr. Nicholson." He glanced at the chest she'd set on the table between them. "What's in it?" "I don't know," Damara admitted. "Sam never showed me. He just said it contained hope and that you'd forgotten what that was." Randall's face darkened. "Your brother always did have a flair for the dramatic." "He spoke highly of you," Damara said softly. "Said you saved his life more than once during the war." "He saved mine too," Randall replied, almost reluctantly. "But that was a long time ago." He reached for the chest, then seemed to think better of it, drawing his hand back as if the wood might burn him. "You must be tired," he said abruptly, standing. "I've got a spare room. You can rest, clean up if you want. We can deal with this later." Damara hesitated. "I don't want to impose. It's nearly 20 miles back to town, Miss Whitman." Unless you plan to walk or sprout wings, you'll need to stay the night. I'll ride you in tomorrow." There was no arguing with his logic, though his manner left much to be desired. Damara nodded her thanks and followed him to a small room off the main living area. Like the rest of the house, it contained only the essentials: a narrow bed, a washstand with basin and pitcher, and a small chest for clothing. "It's not much," Randall said, almost apologetically. "It's perfect," Damara assured him. "Thank you." He nodded once, then left her alone, closing the door behind him. Damara sank onto the edge of the bed, bone-weary from her journey. She hadn't been entirely truthful with Randall. While she didn't know what was in the chest, Sam had told her more than she'd revealed. "He needs remembering," Sam had whispered in his final days. "The war took something from him, Damara, something more precious than blood or limb. It took his belief that good things could still happen." She'd promised to deliver the chest, but in her heart, she'd also promised to ensure that whatever message Sam had intended reached more than just Randall's hands. It needed to reach his heart as well. But looking at the grim-faced rancher with his shuttered eyes, Damara wondered if she'd promised more than she could deliver. The sound of a door closing startled her from her thoughts. Through the small window, she caught sight of Randall striding toward the barn, rifle still slung over his shoulder. He moved with the easy grace of a man accustomed to hard work, but there was tension in his shoulders, as if he carried an invisible weight. Damara turned away from the window and began unpacking the few belongings she'd brought. She'd stay the night, as Randall suggested, and in the morning, she'd ensure Sam's final wish was properly fulfilled before returning to St. Louis. She tried to ignore the small voice in her head that whispered this mission might not be as straightforward as she'd hoped. After washing the dust of travel from her face and hands, Damara ventured back into the main room of the house. She found Randall at the stove stirring something in a large pot. "Beans and salt pork," he said without turning. "Nothing fancy." "Smells wonderful," she replied, and meant it. "Can I help?" He gestured toward a cupboard. "Plates are in there, silverware in the drawer below." They worked in silence, setting the table and preparing the simple meal. Damara noticed that despite the sparse furnishings, everything in the kitchen was meticulously organized. Randall moved with efficiency, wasting no motion as he sliced bread and portioned out their meal. When they sat down to eat, the silence grew uncomfortable. Damara searched for something to say, some way to bridge the chasm between them. "How long have you had this ranch?" she finally asked. Randall looked up from his plate. 8 years, bought it after mustering out. It's beautiful land." "It's hard land," he corrected, "but it's honest." "Do you run it alone?" "Got a couple of hands who help with the cattle. They bunk in the outbuilding." He took a bite of bread. "They're moving the herd to the north pasture today, won't be back till tomorrow." Damara nodded, understanding now why the ranch had seemed so quiet. "Sam told me you were from Pennsylvania originally." Something flickered in Randall's eyes. "Your brother talked too much. He cared about you," Damara countered. "That's why this delivery was so important to him." Randall's spoon clattered against his plate. "Look, Miss Whitman, I appreciate you keeping your word to your brother, but there's no need to pretty it up. Whatever's in that chest, it's just Sam's way of having the last word. Always needed that, even when we were pinned down at Petersburg." Damara studied him for a moment. "You sound angry with him." "I'm not angry," Randall said, but his clenched jaw suggested otherwise. "I just don't see the point in dwelling on the past." "Is that what you think Sam wanted, for you to dwell on the past?" Randall pushed his plate away, half the food untouched. "I think Sam should have let sleeping dogs lie." Before Damara could respond, he stood and carried his plate to the wash basin. "I've got chores to finish before dark. Make yourself at home." He was gone before she could say another word, the door closing firmly behind him. Damara sighed as she gathered the remaining dishes. Whatever wound existed between Sam and Randall went deeper than she'd imagined. She wondered, not for the first time, what could be in the small chest that Sam believed would heal it. The setting sun cast long shadows across the ranch yard as Damara stepped onto the porch, drawn by the sound of chopping wood. Randall worked steadily, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal corded forearms as he split log after log with mechanical precision. She watched him for a moment, noting the controlled power in each swing, the way his body moved with practiced ease. There was something almost hypnotic about the rhythm, the lift, the swing, the satisfying crack as wood gave way to steel. When Randall paused to wipe sweat from his brow, he caught sight of her. His axe lowered slowly. "Need something?" he called. Damara shook her head. "Just getting some air." He nodded and turned back to his work, but his rhythm seemed different now, more self-conscious. After a few more logs, he embedded the axe in the chopping block and gathered an armful of split wood. "Fire gets cold at night," he explained as he passed her on his way to the house. "Even in summer." Damara followed him inside, where he knelt to arrange the wood in the fireplace. As the flames caught and grew, warm light filled the room, softening its harsh edges. Randall remained crouched by the fire, watching the flames with an expression Damara couldn't decipher. Without the perpetual motion of chores to occupy him, he seemed almost lost. "Sam said you were the best shot in the regiment," she said, breaking the silence. A small, reluctant smile tugged at Randall's mouth. "Second best. Your brother could thread a needle at 300 yards when he had a mind to. He always claimed it was luck. It wasn't." Randall stood, brushing dust from his hands. "Sam never gave himself enough credit." "That sounds like him," Damara agreed, warming to the conversation. "He could never take a compliment. Remember how he'd go red as a tomato whenever the captain praised him?" Randall asked, then stopped abruptly, as if catching himself sharing too much. "He was the same at home," Damara said quickly, trying to keep the moment alive. "Once he received an award at school and he hid it in his room because he couldn't bear Mother fussing over it." Randall's guarded expression softened slightly. "Sounds like Sam," he gestured to the chairs by the fire. "Might as well sit, no sense standing around like strangers." Damara took the offered seat, noticing how Randall positioned himself with the fire between them as if needing the barrier. "Were you close?" he asked unexpectedly. "You and Sam?" "Very," Damara nodded. "Our mother died when I was 16 and father was never the same after. Sam practically raised me after that. He mentioned you in his letters," Randall said. "Always going on about how smart you were, said you could out-argue any lawyer in Missouri." Damara laughed softly. "He exaggerated. I simply enjoy a good debate. He was proud of you." Randall's gaze returned to the fire. "Plan to come back and help you open that school you wanted." The mention of her old dream caught Damara by surprise. "He told you about that? Said you'd be the best teacher those St. Louis children ever had." Damara felt a lump form in her throat. "I never knew he took that seriously." "Sam took everything about you seriously." Randall's voice grew quieter. "Last letter I got from him, maybe 3 years back, he was still talking about saving up to help you get started." The revelation pierced Damara's heart. She'd abandoned her teaching ambitions after their father died, taking work as a seamstress to help support them both. She'd never imagined Sam still carried her dream for her, especially after they'd lost touch. "We hadn't spoken in almost 2 years," she admitted. "Not until I received word he was ill." Randall looked up sharply. 2 years. "We had a disagreement about his drinking, his wandering." She twisted her hands in her lap. "I said some hard things, but you went to him in the end." "Yes, though almost too late." The firelight cast shadows across Randall's face as he considered her words. "At least you made it." Something in his tone made Damara wonder if he harbored similar regrets about Sam. "He asked about you," she said gently. "Wanted to know if I'd heard anything." Randall's expression closed off again. "I should check on the livestock before turning in, make sure the barn's secure." He stood abruptly, and Damara feared she'd pushed too far, but instead of leaving immediately, he hesitated, looking down at her with an unreadable expression. "Sam was a good man," he said finally. "Better than most, including me." Before she could respond, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Damara stayed by the fire, watching the flames dance and wondering about the complicated history between her brother and this solitary rancher. Whatever had happened between them, it had left scars deep enough that even Sam's death couldn't fully heal the breach. She glanced at the Hope chest, still sitting on the table where she'd left it. Tomorrow, she would insist Randall open it. It was time for Sam's final message to be delivered, whatever it contained. Sleep came fitfully to Damara that night. The strange bed, the lingering grief for her brother, and the puzzle of Randall Nicholson all conspired to keep her mind active long after she should have been resting. When dawn finally broke, she rose and dressed quickly, eager to complete her mission and begin the long journey back to St. Louis. She had responsibilities waiting for her orders from the dressmaker's shop where she worked, rent coming due on her small apartment. She found the main room empty but a pot of coffee warming on the stove. Through the window, she spotted Randall in the corral, working with a spirited chestnut mare. Even from a distance, she could see the gentleness in his approach, the patience as he spoke to the animal and stroked its neck. It was a side of him she hadn't glimpsed before, a tenderness that contradicted his gruff manner. Damara poured herself coffee and stepped onto the porch, watching as Randall guided the mare through a series of movements. Horse and man moved in harmony, a dance built on trust rather than dominance. When Randall finally noticed her, he gave the mare a final pat and made his way to the porch. "Morning," he said, removing his hat briefly to wipe his brow. "Coffee hot?" "Yes, I hope you don't mind that I helped myself. Wouldn't have left it out if I did." He climbed the steps and reached for the cup she offered. Their fingers brushed briefly, and Damara was surprised by the warmth that traveled up her arm at the contact. Randall seemed to feel it too, his eyes meeting hers for a moment before he quickly stepped back, creating distance between them. "Beautiful horse," Damara said, nodding toward the corral. "Penny. Found her half-starved last winter, caught in barbed wire. Owner had abandoned her." Randall's voice softened as he looked at the mare. "Took months to get her to trust me, she seems to now. Animals are straightforward. They don't hide what they feel." He took a sip of coffee. "People are more complicated." "Yes, they are," Damara agreed, "like you and Sam." Randall's shoulders tensed, but he didn't walk away this time. "What did he tell you about us?" "Not much," she admitted. "Just that you were closer than brothers once, and that something happened to change that." "War happened, Miss Whitman. It changes everyone it touches." "I understand that, but Sam seemed to think it was more specific." Randall set his cup down on the porch railing, his knuckles white around it. "Your brother carried a lot of guilt that wasn't his to bear." "About what?" For a long moment, Damara thought he wouldn't answer. Then, barely audible, "About Gettysburg, about choices no man should have to make." He straightened, as if physically shaking off the weight of memory. "I need to finish with Penny, then we should see about getting you back to town." "Not yet," Damara said firmly. "You still haven't opened the chest." Randall's jaw tightened. "Miss Whitman, Damara," she corrected. "And I didn't travel all this way to leave my brother's final wish unfulfilled." "Please, Mr. Nicholson, whatever is inside, Sam believed it was important." "Randall," he countered softly, "and I'll open it. Just give me time with Penny first. Some things can't be rushed." Damara nodded her understanding, watching as he returned to the corral. Whatever was in that chest had Randall nervous, and she was beginning to suspect it had everything to do with Gettysburg and the choices he'd mentioned. By mid-morning, Randall had finished his work with the mare and completed his other essential chores. He moved with purpose but without hurry, as if prolonging the moment when he would have to face whatever waited in Sam's chest. Finally, as the sun climbed toward its zenith, he washed up and joined Damara at the table where the chest sat between them, its presence looming larger than its modest size would suggest. "Should I leave you alone for this?" Damara asked, suddenly unsure of her place in this moment. Randall considered the question, then shook his head. "You came all this way. Seems only right you see it through." He reached for the chest, his calloused fingers tracing the grain of the wood before resting on the brass latches. With a deep breath, he flipped them open and raised the lid. Inside, nestled in a bed of cotton cloth, lay a wooden soldier, crudely carved but recognizable as a Union infantryman. Beside it was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, and a small leather pouch. Randall stared at the contents, his face a storm of emotions. "I don't understand," he whispered. "There's a letter," Damara pointed out gently, with hands that trembled slightly. Randall unfolded the paper. As he read, the color drained from his face, and Damara saw his eyes grow bright with unshed tears. "Sam," he murmured, "you damned fool." "What does it say?" Damara asked when he finally lowered the letter. Randall passed it to her, then picked up the wooden soldier, turning it over in his hands as if it were made of glass. Damara read the letter slowly, Sam's familiar handwriting blurring occasionally as tears welled in her own eyes. Rand, if you're reading this, I've finally stopped running. Fitting, since running is what I've been doing since July 3, 1863, remember that day at Gettysburg. We were pinned down near Devil's Den and you got hit. I still hear you sometimes screaming for me not to leave you, but orders came to fall back and I had to choose stay and likely die with you or follow orders. I left you, Rand. I left you bleeding in Pennsylvania dirt while I saved myself. The choice has haunted me every day since. But here's the truth I learned too late: you survived. 3 months later, I heard you'd been taken prisoner, then exchanged. By then, my shame was too deep. How could I face you after what I'd done, so I kept running. The wooden soldier enclosed is the one you carved for me the night before Pickett's charge. You said it would bring me luck. It did. I lived while better men died. The pouch contains what's left of my luck, $212. Not much for a lifetime of cowardice, but maybe enough to help your ranch through winter. I'm dying, Rand, and I can't leave this world without asking, forgive me. Not for my sake, it's too late for that, but for yours. The hatred you've carried has poisoned you as surely as consumption has poisoned me. Remember what you told me once. Hope is the only thing stronger than fear. You helped me believe that once. I pray you can believe it again. Your brother in all but blood, Sam. Damara looked up to find Randall staring out the window, the wooden soldier clutched in his fist. He thought I hated him, Randall said, his voice raw. All these years. Did you? Damara asked softly. No. He turned to face her, his eyes bright with pain. I was angry, yes, felt abandoned, but I understood. Orders were orders. Then why didn't you find him after the war? Randall's laugh was hollow. Pride, stubbornness, I waited for him to come to me. When he didn't, I told myself he didn't care. He cared, Damara assured him. More than you know. Too late now, isn't it? Randall set the wooden soldier down gently. Both of us too stubborn to bridge the gap until death forced our hands. Damara reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. Not too late for everything. Sam wanted you to find hope again. That's still possible. Randall looked down at their hands, then slowly turned his palm up, lacing his fingers with hers. The contact was tentative but deliberate. Your brother always did believe in impossible things, he said. Sometimes impossible things happen, Damara replied. Sometimes hope finds us even when we've stopped looking for it. The moment stretched between them, fragile yet powerful, then Randall withdrew his hand and stood. I should get you back to town, he said. Train to Cheyenne leaves tomorrow morning. Yes, Damara agreed, though the thought of leaving brought an unexpected pang. I've imposed long enough. As she began gathering her belongings, Randall watched her with an unreadable expression. Finally, he cleared his throat. Unless. Damara looked up. Unless. Unless you wanted to stay another day or two. The words seemed to surprise him as much as her. I mean, it's a long journey. Might be good to rest a bit more before heading back. Damara considered the offer. Logic said she should return to St. Louis as soon as possible. But something else, something warmer and less rational, urged her to stay. I wouldn't want to be a burden, she said carefully. You're not, Randall assured her quickly. It's nice having someone to talk to, and I'd like to hear more about Sam, about the years I missed. His honesty touched her. Then I'll stay, just for a few days. The relief on his face was unmistakable. Good, that's good. The next 3 days passed in a gentle rhythm that surprised them both with its ease. Damara helped around the ranch, cooking meals that were more varied than Randall's usual fare, mending clothes that had been awaiting attention, and even assisting with some of the lighter outdoor chores. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked. Randall shared stories of Sam during the war, his courage, his humor in dark times, his unwavering loyalty to his friends. Damara told him about Sam's childhood, about their parents, about the dreams they'd shared growing up in St. Louis. Slowly, the barrier between them softened. Randall laughed more freely, his eyes losing some of their haunted quality. Damara found herself drawn to his quiet strength, his unexpected gentleness. the integrity that ran bone deep beneath his gruff exterior. On the fourth morning, Damara woke to the sound of voices in the ranch yard. Looking out her window, she saw Randall talking with two cowboys, presumably the hands he'd mentioned. They were unloading supplies from a wagon, and Randall was gesturing toward the barn. She dressed quickly and joined them, feeling suddenly self-conscious as the men turned to look at her. "Miss Whitman," Randall greeted her, his tone more formal than it had been when they were alone. "These are my hands, Jacob Ellis and Frank Porter. Boys, this is Miss Whitman, a friend of the family." The cowboys tipped their hats politely, curiosity evident in their expressions. "Pleasure, madam," the older one, Jacob, said. "Boss didn't mention we had company." "It was an unexpected visit," Damara explained. "I'll be returning to St. Louis soon." "No rush," Randall said quickly, then cleared his throat. "That is, the stage only runs twice a week." Jacob and Frank exchanged knowing glances that made Damara's cheeks warm. "We'll finish unloading, boss," Frank said. "Got those fence posts you wanted too?" "Good," Randall nodded. "North pasture still needs work before we move the herd." After the men continued their work, Randall turned to Damara with an apologetic expression. "I should help them. There's coffee inside." "I can help too," she offered. "I'm stronger than I look." The smile that crossed his face sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. "I don't doubt it for a second, Miss Whitman." "Damara," she reminded him. "After 4 days of meals together, I think we're beyond formalities." His eyes softened. "Damara," the way he said her name as if testing its weight on his tongue made her breath catch. For a moment they simply looked at each other, something unspoken passing between them. Then Jacob called for Randall's assistance, breaking the spell. "Duty calls," he said reluctantly. "But maybe later we could ride out to the creek. There's something there I'd like to show you." "I'd like that," Damara replied, surprised by how much she meant it. The rest of the morning passed quickly, with Damara helping to prepare lunch for the men and organize the newly arrived supplies. By early afternoon, Randall had saddled 2 horses, his own bay gelding and a gentle gray mare for Damara. "You sure you're comfortable riding?" he asked as he helped her mount. "My father insisted both Sam and I learn," she assured him, "though it's been a few years." "Lucy's gentle as a lamb," Randall promised, his hand lingering on hers as she took the reins. "She'll take good care of you." The ride to the creek took them through rolling grassland dotted with wildflowers, past herds of Randall's cattle grazing peacefully in the summer sun. Damara breathed deeply, savoring the clean air and open space so different from the crowded streets of St. Louis. "It's beautiful here," she said as they rode side by side. "It can be harsh too," Randall replied. "Winters that freeze your bones, summers that bake the land hard as iron." But on days like today, he looked around, his face softening. "On days like today, there's nowhere else I'd rather be." The creek appeared before them, a ribbon of silver winding through a stand of cottonwood trees. Randall led them to a small clearing by the water, where the trees provided dappled shade from the afternoon sun. As they dismounted, Damara noticed a simple wooden cross standing at the clearing's edge, weathered by years of exposure. Randall saw her looking and led her toward it. "This is what I wanted to show you," he said quietly. As they drew closer, Damara could make out a name carved into the crossbeam, Hope. "Your wife?" she asked softly, a strange tightness in her chest. Randall shook his head. "My daughter." The simple statement hit Damara like a physical blow. "I didn't know you had a child. Few people do." He knelt by the cross, gently clearing away some weeds that had grown around its base. "She lived less than a day. Her mother, my wife, Clara, died bringing her into the world." "I'm so sorry," Damara whispered. "It was 6 years ago," Randall continued. "Clara wanted to name her Hope, said a ranch was a good place to raise hope." His voice caught. "When we lost them both, I buried my hope here with them." Damara knelt beside him, her heart aching for his loss. "Is that why you live so sparely? What's the point of comfort without them to share it?" He looked at her, his eyes reflecting pain long suppressed. When Sam wrote about hope being stronger than fear, he didn't know some fears can't be overcome. "What are you afraid of, Randall?" His gaze dropped to the small grave. "Caring again, losing again." "And so you've chosen to lose from the start." The words could have been an accusation, but Damara's tone held only gentle understanding. Randall was silent for a long moment. "I never thought of it that way." "Sam sent me here with hope," Damara said softly. "Not just what was in the chest, but what he believed you needed." "And what do you think I need, Damara Whitman?" Randall asked, his voice barely audible over the burble of the creek. "The same thing we all need, a reason to look forward rather than back." Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, a recognition, a possibility. "I've been looking back for so long," Randall admitted. "I'm not sure I remember how to do anything else." "Then maybe it's time to learn," Damara suggested. She reached out hesitantly, touching his weathered cheek. "Sometimes hope finds us, even in unexpected places." Randall covered her hand with his own, turning his face slightly into her palm. The gesture was so vulnerable, so unlike his usual guarded demeanor, that Damara felt her heart constrict. "I never expected you," he whispered. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Damara felt herself drawn toward him, pulled by something stronger than conscious thought. When their lips met, it was gentle, at first tentative, questioning. Then Randall's arms encircled her, and the kiss deepened into something more urgent, as if they were both suddenly awake after a long sleep. They drew apart slowly, both breathing heavily, eyes wide with wonder and uncertainty. "I didn't plan that," Randall said, looking slightly dazed. Damara smiled, her hand still resting against his chest where she could feel his heart racing to match her own. "Some of the best things in life aren't planned." He helped her to her feet, his touch lingering longer than necessary. "We should head back before the light fades." As they prepared to leave, Randall took one last look at the small grave. "I think Clara would have liked you," he said softly. "She always said I was too serious." "Sam said the same about me," Damara admitted with a small laugh. "He claimed I needed someone to help me see the lighter side of life." Maybe they were both right. Randall helped her mount her horse, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "Maybe we've been looking back for too long." The ride back to the ranch was quieter, both lost in thought about what had just happened and what it might mean. As the ranch buildings came into view, Damara felt a sudden reluctance to return to reality. "When do you need to leave for St. Louis?" Randall asked as they approached the barn. "The stage comes through tomorrow," she replied. But Damara met his gaze directly. "But I'm wondering if I need to be on it." Hope flared in Randall's eyes, bright and unmistakable. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying I'd like to stay, a little longer at least." She took a deep breath. To see where this might lead. The smile that spread across Randall's face transformed him, erasing years of grief and loneliness in an instant. "I'd like that too," he said simply. "Very much." That evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Damara felt a sense of rightness she hadn't experienced in years. Beside her, Randall seemed more relaxed than she'd yet seen him, as if some long-held tension had finally begun to ease. "I need to write to my employer," she said, "and arrange for my things to be sent." "So you're staying?" The hope in his voice was unmistakable. "For now," she confirmed. "Though I'm not sure what I'll do here, I doubt there's much call for seamstresses in these parts." Randall's hand found hers in the gathering dusk. "The school in town lost their teacher last spring. She married a railroad man and moved to Denver. They've been looking for someone qualified ever since." Damara turned to him in surprise. "A teaching position?" "Sam said you wanted to teach," he reminded her. "Maybe it's time you got the chance." The thoughtfulness of the suggestion touched her deeply. "You remembered." "I remember everything you've told me, Damara." His simple honesty warmed her more than any elaborate declaration could have. "I'll inquire about it when we go to town." "Tomorrow," Randall agreed. "We'll go together." As night fell completely, they remained on the porch, talking quietly about possibilities and plans, about healing old wounds and building new beginnings. When Randall finally walked Damara to her door, he paused, his expression serious. "I'm not an easy man," he warned. "I've been alone a long time, set in my ways." "I'm not looking for easy," she replied. "I'm looking for real." The kiss they shared then held promises neither was ready to voice but both already felt. When they parted, Randall touched her cheek gently. "Thank you for bringing hope back to my ranch," he whispered. "Thank you for being brave enough to accept it," she answered. 6 months later, on a crisp December morning, Damara stood in the doorway of the ranch house, their home, now watching as Randall helped his hands load the wagon for their weekly trip to town. In the months since she'd decided to stay, much had changed at the Nicholson ranch. Curtains hung in windows that had long been bare. A garden had been planted behind the house, already planned for spring planting. The porch now boasted a swing where they spent evenings together, talking about their days, Randall's work with the ranch, Damara's experiences teaching at the small school in town. Most significantly, the spare, utilitarian rooms had softened with touches of comfort and personality. Photographs and books lined shelves that had stood empty for years. The large table now regularly hosted not just meals but games, conversations, and planning sessions for the ranch's future. As Randall finished with the wagon and turned toward the house, his face lit up at the sight of her waiting. Even now, months into their courtship, that smile never failed to quicken her pulse. "Ready for town, teacher?" he called as he climbed the steps. "Almost," Damara replied, reaching up to straighten his collar. "Just need to gather my students' papers." He caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "Got something for you first." From his pocket, he withdrew a small wooden box, similar in craftsmanship to the one Sam had sent, but newer. He placed it in her hands with uncharacteristic nervousness. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it and see." Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, lay a simple gold ring topped with a small pearl. "It was my mother's," Randall explained, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been carrying it around for weeks, waiting for the right moment." Damara looked up at him, her vision blurring with tears. "And this is the right moment. Every moment with you feels right," he said simply. "I love you, Damara Whitman. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she whispered, her heart so full she could barely speak. "Yes, Randall, I will." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Damara thought of the journey that had brought her here, of Sam's final request, of the small chest of hope she'd carried into a stranger's ranch yard, of the wounded man who'd greeted her with suspicion and a rifle. "Sam would be happy," she said softly. "He'd be smug, more likely," Randall chuckled. "Matchmaking from beyond the grave. Do you think that's what he intended all along?" Randall considered this, his arm warm around her waist. "I think he intended for me to find hope again. He couldn't have known what form it would take." "Or who would carry it to you," Damara added. "I'm glad it was you," Randall said, drawing her closer. "Of all the hope that could have walked into my ranch yard, I'm very glad it was you." Later that day, after their trip to town where they shared their news with friends and neighbors, they rode together to the creek. At the small grave marked Hope, they stood hand in comfortable silence. Finally, Randall spoke. "I thought Hope died here," he said quietly, "but it didn't. It was just waiting for the right time, the right person. For both of us," Damara agreed, thinking of her own abandoned dreams, her grief for Sam, the uncertain future she'd faced in St. Louis. As the winter sun cast long shadows across the land they now shared, Randall drew Damara into his arms. In his embrace, she felt not just love but something deeper, a sense of coming home, of finding where she truly belonged. "In the spring," Randall murmured against her hair, "I thought we might plant wildflowers here, bring some color." "She would like that," Damara said, understanding the significance of the gesture, not an erasing of the past, but an integration of it into their future. As they rode back toward the ranch, the setting sun gilded the plains in golden light. The house in the distance was no longer just a structure but a home, waiting to be filled with the life they would build together. Damara thought of the wooden soldier, now displayed on their mantel alongside a photograph of Sam. She thought of the small chest that had carried hope across hundreds of miles. And she thought of the man riding beside her, a man who had learned to hope again, to love again, to look forward rather than back. Some journeys began with a single step. Hers had begun with a promise to her dying brother. But it had become something far greater, a journey back to hope, for both of them. And as the ranch drew nearer, Damara knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where she was meant to be beside the cowboy who had forgotten what hope was, until she walked into his life and reminded him.